Is anybody talking?
No.
Good.
Okay, well, the internet in general is slow this evening, and Mr. Betcher, I believe we are live.
Great. We will call this Finance Committee for Monday, April 26, 2021 to order. Mr. Lanzer, I believe we need to start off with a roll call.
Mr. Betcher,
Here?
Ms. Cheney,
Here.
Mr. Pridnoff.
Present.
All members are present.
All right, we need to set and adopt the agenda. Any updates to that before we do? All right, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? All right, nobody registered to address the council. We have minutes from March 22nd, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So motion.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Motion carries. We'll move into new business with financial packet for March 2021. Mr. Lanzer, all yours.
All right, for the month of March, fiscal year 21, the village had an adjusted bank balance of $2.4 million. Of this, approximately $2.2 million can be found in the village's primary checking account, and the remaining balance for previous financial reports. The majority of this balance found in the village's primary funds, and those resources can only be used for those purposes. $1,000. And the top 5 payment payees for March fiscal year 21 were, of course, payroll, Ohio Police and Fire Pension, Rumpke, the village's legal counsel, Donald and Miller, and OPERS. As for village receipts, the village received 37 payments that totaled $119,000. And the largest sources of revenue over this period were RETA, the Ohio Plan, the state of Ohio, and Hamilton County. Total general fund revenue for the month was $90,000. And this figure was approximately 10% or $10,000 less than what the village generated over the same period last year. For the year, total village general fund revenue is $323,000, 3% more than what the village generated over the same period last year. I want to draw your attention to the income tax. So for the month in March, we captured basically the same amount as March of fiscal year 20, but for the year, we're about $23,000 off of where we were at this point last year. And I think this could be for several reasons, including some mundane explanations, such as the extension on the tax filing deadline. I think there could have been a delay in receipts that hopefully will become realized later in the year. In any regard, the village administration will continue to monitor revenues closely. And I think it's important to keep in mind as well that with the last round of stimulus funding, the village can use that to offset any sort of revenue shortfalls. We're still waiting formal guidance on the rules surrounding that in terms of accounting, as well as the total amount. But once I hear any sort of information regarding that, I'll be sure to report back to you all. As for village appropriations, the village spent $164,000 for the month. This is another increase in appropriation spend when compared to that from March of last year by nearly $20,000. Again, I think there's several causes for this, including the use of more overtime that we're seeing in the police department in particular, as well as some staffing adjustments and overall increases in employment costs. Some increase in spend has been planned for the year, as you can tell by looking at the final appropriation figures. Appropriations are just higher this year than they were last year. For the year, the village has spent $441,000 through March. Yet as a percentage of spend versus what was appropriated March through March of this year compared to through March of last year, those percentages are nearly identical. They're off by less than a percentage point. That is the end of my financial report. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Any questions for Mr. Lancer? No, thank you. I would imagine the timing of the RETA income, because if you remember from last year, they extended that deadline very last minute, and this year they were much more proactive about it. So hopefully we'll see some more evening out towards that May deadline.
Yep.
So cool. Thank you, sir. Moving into the purchase and financing contract for a new police vehicle.
Okay, as
Yeah.
you all,
Go ahead, Ron.
I was going to say, as you may recall, Unit 116 was irreparably damaged in an accident about 4 to 6 weeks ago. One of the things we had done as a part of our overall police strategy for vehicles was to commit to allowing Unit 116, which was replaced by Unit, I believe it's 120, which was the new truck that was that is not yet in service. The police department was allowed to keep that particular vehicle because it was of no additional expense to us other than the consumables and upkeep of the vehicle.
Connersville, Indiana, and as I recall, they were awarded the full contract in 2020, 2021 by the state of Indiana. So I just need for the legislation to tie it into what cooperative purchasing association we're purchasing it through. And I think last year, didn't we buy one from Indiana Sheriff's Association?
That's correct. The last Dodge truck came through that same organization. I believe they're still affiliated. I thought I had the contract here, but I don't. I think that was in the packet of information I sent to you, Terry.
Yeah, I've got the invoice from Larkin Greenwood, and then I got the U.S. Bank Corp financing. It's just the cover legislation, we had to tie it into the organization from which we're purchasing it. So I'm going to go with it being Indiana Sheriff's. I said, I know that they got the contract because I actually sold this dealership last year to Larkin Greenwood. So circles around.
Yeah, we actually, the Durangos were also purchased through the same contract bid group.
Yeah.
So Terry, I'll confirm with Sergeant Reed tomorrow that was a part of that same group and let you know for sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident it was.
I'll do the two pieces like we traditionally do, the one for the purchase and the second for the financing with U.S. Bank Corp.
Okay, so we asked for 3 separate quotes for the lease of the vehicle. GM actually came in at 4.644%. Ford financing came in at 6.15%. And as we noted here, so I apologize. I had to switch where I was. So I'm scrambling to pick up documents I already had open. So the rate that
2.18%.
Thank you, Andy.
2 points less.
So definitely the better deal, and it's also flexible for us to make 3 annual payments as we've done with the other vehicle. The one thing to note that this, and Chief, I apologize if you already said this is also, again, another truck. So it'll be very similar, just a different brand model of the one that we just outfitted and have ready for service.
That's correct. This vehicle's a Ford F-150 responder. If you get a chance and you're near the PD, swing by and look at the Dodge truck. It gives us a great deal of versatility, storing of equipment, for storing of evidence. The back partition area is divided where you can have equipment stored on one side, a partition that runs down the middle of the vehicle, in between the passenger and driver side. And then there's a seat on the passenger side to allow for transport. We'll be able to have a lot more equipment stored a lot more safely in these vehicles.
So I did send the documents to everybody so you can take a look at those at your leisure. What we would ask for from this committee this evening is if you can make a recommendation to the full council during the finance report to instruct Mr. Donald to go ahead and draft legislation for the purchase of the vehicle that we would pass at the council meeting on May 10th.
Okay.
Any questions?
Do we need to make a recommendation in this committee to like now?
You can make a
Okay.
motion.
So before that, I need to recuse myself from the motions and voting as an employee and shareholder of US Bancorp. I need to bow out of it. So just a heads up that somebody else will have to make the motion and second.
Would you like to appoint someone to do that?
Sure. Mr. Prinoff, if you wouldn't mind, since Miss Cheney's voice is a little rough.
No problem. I would like to recommend to council that we proceed with, I don't know exactly how you worded it, but to proceed as we're.
I'll second it.
And all those in favor? Perfect. And Mr. Lanzer, if you can make note of my abstention, I would appreciate it. Perfect. All right, we will bring that with finance report in general council later tonight. Next is funding replacement of the Firehouse and Rec Center roof.
So with the completion of our payments on the roof for the main building, which started in 2016 and just concluded, I want to say in February, we're now in a position to start looking at replacing the roof that's over the fire department and the recreation area. If you recall in previous meetings and when we've had discussions about what's going on with the fire district, there has always, for a long time, been a problem with water leaking over the sleeping quarters on the second level, which used to be the recreation center. A lot of patches have been done. Essentially, the rubber material that covers the membrane is just shot at this point. And that particular roof has not been replaced in the last 25 years. So it's time to do something. We've had a couple of different contractors take a look at it. The good news is we are able to use a Gulf Manor-based business, Tecta America, who did the roof over the main building. That's the good news. The concerning news is that this project is going to be just south of $95,000 to repair, or not to repair, but to replace and do what needs to be done to make that roof solid again. Part of the complication is there are a number of HVAC units that sit on top of that building, which are different from the municipal building, which makes it a little bit more complicated process. I've been working with Mr. Donnellan to ensure that this organization has the authorization through government contracts in the state of Ohio for us to be able to proceed with a simple bid process. And Mr. Donnellan is preparing a contract that we will work through with Tecta America. This is a project that we need to try and get done sooner than later because the cost of roofing materials are going sky high. Somebody quoted a couple of weeks ago that a 6x8 board of lumber has more than tripled in price since the fall. And that's something that we're going to experience, not that they're using wood, but it's construction materials in general. I will have a draft contract to council members' individual mailboxes for you to review and touch base with me individually if you have any questions. We'll also mention this in the council meeting, but I just wanted to make you aware that this is coming and we're working through this. We would like to have a contract approved at that May 10th meeting so they can start sometime in mid-May on the actual project.
Can we just discuss how we're paying for it? Are we paying cash? Are we financing? Are we doing anything like that? Is it coming
Sure.
from COVID funds or anything like that?
At this time, there's nothing that we can identify that would fund this. So this will just be a straight village expense. Likely what we will do is what we've did with the last roof is we'll find somebody to fund it for us, or to do another loan. I know that the bank that we've used for our vehicles has expressed interest in quoting, plus we had used another financial organization to finance the last one. So as soon as we have the contract in hand and the exact cost, we'll then look at funding, which should probably take a couple of days for us to secure.
Great.
Andy, did you have any thoughts on directly trying to pay for it outright?
I think I tend to prefer financing it only because it'll give us, I think it gives us flexibility, especially if we get rates comparable to what we just got with the police vehicle through US Bank. We financed the previous one. I forget the term. It may have been 3 or 5 years. And it was paid from the general fund. And I would prefer doing it that way, but we do have the reserve in hand and available if we would just prefer to pay it outright.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to take a look at what the interest costs are with the
Right.
plan of replacing the previous loan with this loan.
Cool.
Any questions?
Awesome. All right. Without any other questions, we'll move into amending the pay ordinance to add the detailed pay rate for police officers.
So just as a preamble here, the police department does various details for various organizations, and one in particular pays a specific amount to us, and that amount is a different amount than what our ordinance states we are actually able to pay. That being the case, it's necessary for us to amend our legislation to be in compliance, to be able to pay what is being requested for this particular rate. And what I'm going to do is ask Chief Campbell. Chief, if you could explain the program, who it is, and what the rate is, all those kinds of things for us.
Yeah, what we're speaking to is the Ovi Task Force that's funded by the Ohio Department of Safety. The grant is administered by Blue Ash Police Department. They've managed it for as long as I can remember. And what it allows for is additional focused patrol to look for impaired drivers, seatbelt violations, as well as driving under suspension, driving without license, those type of issues. The program is operated outside of the regular patrol duties. So when a Gulf Manor officer does this, we'll have 2 regular patrolmen on duty, and then we would have a detail officer whose responsibility is to patrol for these types of violations. The hours are adjusted more or less monthly in terms of the amount of hours available, as well as the hours that they expect the patrols to occur. And then any hours worked within that span are then reimbursed by the state. They reimburse not only the pay rate for the officer, but they reimburse pension costs, benefit costs. There's a formula where they cover fuel consumed and use of vehicles, just to make sure that the program goals are met. We are our detail rate, what we find in the area and surrounding us is typically $45 per hour. That's pretty standard. There's agencies that bill more than that. We're not there yet. But what we do is when an officer works this, it takes out the question of they may be able to work before or after returning from time off. The part-timers are able to do it to give extra patrol within the village. So our goal is to standardize the pay for all the officers across the board.
So Chief, one of the questions that came up was the rate or the reimbursement that we were receiving was at $45 per hour. And I could be wrong, so clarify this if my perception is wrong here. The request was to actually pay the employee at $45 per hour. So I guess we need to understand where the actual pay rate comes in and where the reimbursement for pension pickup and any related costs to the officer, use of vehicle, those kinds of things. How is that reimbursed back to us?
Correct. Okay. So the sheets, the worksheets, Sergeant Reed is our liaison with the OVI Task Force. I know he submitted a sheet that breaks that down. If an officer does a detail, let's say at a construction site during traffic, during road construction, that officer, if the detail rate is $45, that officer is paid that amount. That's on the business. What the state does is, because they know that they're using cruisers, which we are required to use for traffic enforcement, they pay $45 plus an additional percentage to cover those costs associated. I don't have the sheet in front of me. I know it was forwarded off by Sergeant Reed, but it's a formula that's used across the board by all the participating agencies in Hamilton County.
Okay. Mr. Donellan, what is it that we need to have for you to be able to sort through this and figure out how we need to amend our pay ordinance?
Well, we could put a pay scale in there for defining these duties. My concern is, if we're paying the $45 for that work and the state is paying us $45 plus the car plus etc., when we get it and we pay the officer, is that adjusting our base for liability for overtime compensation so that it's skewing their underlying base to show their compensation rate is much higher, and therefore on their day-to-day details we end up paying more for overtime because that $45 is rolled into their total compensation base? How's the state address that?
The state defers to the amount. So what we've looked at is, instead of having a different rate listed for each individual officer, because during the year, an officer's pay rate can change because of promotion or an increase because of their service time. So what we do, so we're not having to constantly adjust that, is we submit the flat detail rate that applies across the board. That's a number that lands at the average of the overtime rate, so that we're not resubmitting each time an officer's pay status changes throughout the year.
So I guess, do we really need to change our underlying pay rate if the officer's getting the time and a half when they work overtime based upon the current pay rate, and we're just seeking reimbursement up to $45 an hour? I mean, what's our hourly rate for our range of officers?
It varies from near that rate down to, I mean, if you have a part-time officer that wants to work that detail, but they don't have overtime hours available, or they're not to that threshold, the thought was to make this attractive so that these hours don't go unused, that it's treated like a detail. So, a part-time officer might work 48 hours in a 2-week pay period, but they have the ability to work this detail rate at a detail rate like they would working at a construction zone, at the school detail, at a sporting event, and it's paid as a detail.
Now, when they work construction or a school event, they get paid directly by the contractor or the school.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, the distinction is we're paying it, we're getting money for it. I want to make sure I can check the FLSA rules and regulations, because I think that when it comes and you're paying it and you adjust the hourly rate for just that specific work because it's related to the work that they do day to day, it raises up the total compensation that we have to pay to measure time and a half. So if somebody's making 20 bucks an hour and gets a $45 detail, it's pulling that $20 up for termination of overtime compensation when they work more than the allocated hours during that pay period. So if everybody's making 30 bucks an hour, we're fine. But if somebody's making less than 30 bucks an hour, it triggers that additional liability to us for their other work.
Gotcha. My understanding of this when we checked with the task force is that it could be a set aside detail rate, that it was allowable. I can have Sergeant Reed reach out to the officer that administrates this to get clarification if that's needed. My thought was if we were to do some legislation is it's basically because we sign this agreement every year and send it in, that we just have the legislation basically speak to it. It covers the rate agreed to and sent in to the task force by the participating agency. If we need more than that, I can certainly get that for you.
Yeah, let me try and explain this. If an officer comes on for his first duty shift in a pay period and works 8 hours at 45 bucks an hour, then works another 8 hours at 45 bucks an hour, and then ends up going back to his regular hourly rate and works another 60 hours, and determining what that liability is for overtime compensation when it goes over the limit, you don't go time and a half times the regular pay, you go time and a half times the underlying, so to speak, 40 hours that they've worked. So if they're getting paid 16 hours at a very high rate, it skews that liability for overtime for those hours that are worked outside of that period. Even though they may not have worked the task force outside the period, it puts us in a liability situation because they tipped over the scale of compensation and hours worked. So I just want to see how the state's giving us that coverage that we don't wind up with an FLSA claim by an officer.
Understood. Okay, we'll get more clarification. I know that we have reached out and had a letter explaining it more clearly, but we can get more detail than that. Our thought was to avoid the overtime and just make it a separate detail rate.
So our concern, Terry, is to make sure that we have documentation that authorizes us to go in and change a pay rate to these levels for running weekly payroll. So we basically just need to put a process or a procedure in place that we know how to follow.
Yeah.
Anna, did that cover the concerns that you and I had talked about?
Yeah, just that we need to know what the bill rate is as well as the paid rate to make sure that the bill rate covers, the $45 plus the pension costs associated with that, plus whatever they say it's going to cover for the car in that. Because I've only seen anything that worked up to what they think that the employees should be paid.
Okay.
The sheet I see that is submitted, it was actually completed in October and submitted, shows the base pay rate for the detail at $45 an hour. And then there's two spaces for, it's a formula that adds in percentages. And I couldn't name the percentage off the top of my head, but there's additional percentage on top of the $45 detail rate. I can have resubmit that form that he submitted.
Okay,
Okay, we'll touch base with you guys in the next day or so, and Terry, we'll get back to you regarding it, and you're going to check on how the state explains it.
Yeah, if there's some paperwork that we're already seeing with Sergeant Reed, just scan that paperwork over and let me take a look at it. It might answer the question.
Okay.
and currently most of the people that do this are part-timers, and they're under, 60 hours of pay when they do it. And since they're OPERs, they have a different pension reporting scale than if they were the police full-time.
Okay.
Yes, that's the reason for the detail, is to make sure that we can get buy-in and participation from all members of the department, not just the full-timers.
Great, Chief. Thank you. We'll look forward to talking about this further.
Thank you.
All right. Moving into old business, the audit for 2019, 2020.
We're still working on it. There was a few things that I believe Ron and Terry are working on. Once those are completed, I will send them to Perry, and we will get, I'll start working on assembling the document, their gigantic document request, and scheduling a date. But we're working through the initial questionnaire.
So Andy, at this point, they're planning on physically coming to the village to do an on-site.
That's our
Collection.
preference. I haven't spoken in great detail with them about what their preferences are yet.
Okay.
I think that they're taking a wait and see approach based on COVID guidance.
Okay. And Terry, I need to touch base with you. There was another public records request thing that popped up. We just need to finalize that.
Give you a call tomorrow.
All right. And then new potential COVID funding.
So the best thing to report is that we don't know yet. There is a training that's taking place on Thursday of this week by the Ohio State Auditor to explain more specifically some of the things that we need to do to prepare. And I don't think there's a request that we have to make, but there is of course, a process to be able to be ready to accept the funds. So we are anxiously awaiting.
Sure. Okay. All right. I believe that is the end of the agenda. Any other announcements besides the next Finance Committee meeting being scheduled for Monday, May 24th?
Yeah, there's one thing I forgot to mention during my little piece there. We are going to be adjusting the appropriations this evening. So as part of the financing for the new vehicle, we received an insurance payment for the vehicle that was damaged in the car accident. We're going to use most of that, reappropriate it, and use it to pay off the 2 Durangos a month early. But in order to do that, we are going to need to adjust the revenues and the appropriations just slightly. So we will do that in the regular council meeting. I just want to make sure that you all were aware of our intention to do that.
Perfect.
Mr. Betcher, with the announcements, starting on June 14th, we're going into our summer sessions where we meet once a month during June, July, and August. That agenda will be a 5:30 meeting for the executive committee, a 6:30 meeting for the finance committee, and then council will meet at 7:30. So just so people can prepare their calendars. If you've seen some multiple things show up on your calendar in accepting and deleting committees, that's because I've been trying to realign the calendar to match our schedule over the next 4 or 5 months. So sorry for all the emails, but it's a necessary task.
Perfect. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion?
Second.
All those in favor? All right, we're adjourned. We'll see everybody at council in about 10 minutes.
Please use
Sounds
that
good.
same link for the new council meeting.
All right.
Can I just leave
Thanks.
this on?